Hello, hopefully you enjoyed this upcoming performance from National eTheatr. If you do, well, all of the artists taking part in this project, writers, directors, and actors, are self-employed and currently unemployed thanks to the coronavirus outbreak here in the UK. And so if you want to support them, you can do so by visiting the links, which will be in the description below the video, and you can donate as little or as much as you want to and feel able to. That money will all be distributed evenly among all the artists taking part. If you can't do that, at the very least, we'd love you to be able to share the videos on your social media accounts, on Facebook, on Twitter, with a friend who might be missing their weekly trip to the theatre. Anyone you think might enjoy it, that is also a massive help. You can follow the project and be alerted to any upcoming videos by following the channel, which you can do so up above, or you can follow us on Twitter on @National eTheatr. Thank you for watching, and sit back now and enjoy the show.
There's something going on behind the eyes of a king cobra. Whether it's intelligence, I mean, is that a quantifiable thing? It's not tangible. Well, it is. You've got IQ tests, yeah, but I mean, we talk about mammals as intelligent, reasoning thought, that they think, work things out, they problem solve, but snakes really don't. If I could say snakes were intelligent, I would, but I don't think they are. They are pretty much automatons. It's like flicking a switch. You provide the cue, the scent of food. You stroke a bunny rabbit and then go and put your hand in front of a python. It'll grab your hand because it smells like bunny rabbit and therefore it is bunny rabbit. So, you know, it's flicking a light switch. But king cobras, anyone who's worked with kings, there is something else there. And there's so many stories associated with king cobras, you know, the fact that the female builds a nest, that's true, she does, she builds a nest, the only snake that builds a nest. She'll guard it against anything, including elephants. They kill elephants if they step near the nest. The fact that they say that king cobra comes to a village to die, that if 100 people see a king cobra, it will die. That's probably one of those people carrying a bush knife. They also say if someone kills a king cobra, its mate comes along and sees a picture of the person in its eyes and goes and follows that person. If people live in the area with king cobras, there's a chance they'll see more than one in their life. So, you know, this, but they're not venge-seeking animals. But there is something that seems to be going on behind those eyes. And I called a king cobra, and we were testing whether they could detect this deep growl that king cobras have. They even show a fang as a warning. You know, they're impressive beasts. And I caught this, what was she? Would she be about 8, 10 foot king? About 10, female. Lovely black snake with yellow chevrons in southern India. And we built a big enclosure with high canvas walls, and we put the snake in there and we let it settle down. We were going to play various sounds to see how it responded. And we got little holes cut in the canvas to look through and to put the camera through, and so it was basically in there undisturbed. And I was over on the one side with the cameraman. We were just whispering. And I heard Anis, the Indian lad that was working with me, very good snake guy, and he's going, Mark, look out. And I turned round and I looked up, and the king cobra had come over. She'd climbed up the side and she was now above me, looking down at my head. And I reached up for the snake and I pushed her. She dropped back into the enclosure. But she'd come looking for me. I'd caught her, she'd come looking for me. And then, anyway, an hour or so later, because we'd let her settle down again, and I've got a hole cut in the canvas. I was just talking about what we're going to do and this and that. And I turned to look, and she was there. And she was looking at me. But when she looked at me, as soon as I turned my face to her, I saw her pupils go, dunk, as if she was focusing. They're not supposed to focus. Her pupils centred on my face. So she told the difference between the side of my face and the front of my face. And then as soon as she did that, she started to sway. And I thought she was going to strike, but she wasn't. She was just watching me. She was swaying. And it felt very unusual, because I got this distinct feeling that she was saying, why have you caught me? What have I done to you? Why have you caught me? And I had this overwhelming urge that I wanted to release her as soon as possible. And the best bit of that was when I took her and I put her into a creek in the national park, watched her swim away, go down a little waterfall, and gone out of my life. And that was beautiful. But there's something, and we had a lovely king cobra at work. She died at the end of last year. Sleeping Beauty. She was called that because she had a tumour on her back a bunch of years ago, and we had a vet remove it, but he couldn't totally remove it. And the anaesthetic that was used was ketamine, which is a horrible drug, and it doesn't work well with reptiles. It keeps them under, and she was so shallow. Her breathing and her heartbeat, everything was so shallow. I thought she could just switch off. And I was worried she would just switch off. And she was out for 100 hours, 4 days and nights. And I needed to keep stimulating her. So every hour, I spent 5 minutes with her, tweaking her tail. When I used to work in a hospital, if you're waking a patient up from anaesthesia, sometimes you just tweak the earlobe and it gets through, it just crosses the pain barrier. Not painfully, but you'll bring somebody out. With snakes, they wake up anaesthetic-wise tail first, and tweaking the tail tip will flinch the tail. And getting her moving and so forth. And I was doing this literally for 4 days and nights, for 5 minutes every hour, and my alarm set. And I brought her out of it. She came out the anaesthetic, and then she wanted out of the box she was in, and she wanted to roam around, and she was great. And that's why I called her Sleeping Beauty. I didn't waken her with a kiss, the next best thing. And the tumour came back a couple of years later, as we thought it probably would. And this time I brought in a couple of superb vets from Spain who reckon they got a new technique to actually electro-remove the whole thing. And she came out, we didn't use ketamine, we used a different anaesthetic. She was just gassed down, so she was awake almost immediately. That's what vets are worried about. They don't want the king cobra to wake up and start killing people, in the surgery halfway through an operation. Which I said, well, if I'm here, I'm going to be between you and her anyway. And we did this operation, and it was totally successful. And she recovered completely. And the nice thing was that when we publicised the fact that she'd had this operation, children were sending her get well cards. Just to Sleeping Beauty, hope you get well soon, and this and that, and making cards. I had about a dozen cards and put them all in her enclosure with her. And people could come around and see her. They'd see her get well cards in there, and she'd be curled up on them and things like that. But sadly, she was 17 when she passed, which was last year, which was a shame, but she was beginning to show her age, and she was beginning to lose a little bit of weight, so we knew it was going to happen, and it did. Very sad. I do like the king cobras. That is, when children ask me, what's your favourite snake? No-brainer, king cobra. And it's not because it's a famous iconic snake, it's because there's something else there. There's something else. There's something going on behind those eyes. They're just... anybody who's worked with them tell you they're head and shoulders over every other species. My name's Mark O'Shea. I'm an herpetologist. That's a zoologist who specialises in both reptiles and amphibians, although my primary area is I study snakes. Nicknames. When I was in Papua New Guinea in 1986, in the western province of Papua New Guinea, which is a pretty wild area. Kiwi people live there. And they call me the Gaigai Tauna. And Taunas are magic men. They're witch doctors. And the Gaigai Tauna is the man who has the power over the snakes. And it's largely because I was catching a lot of dangerous snakes. And then thinking, how can he be doing this? I must have some power that I keep secret. I said, no, it's just science. But science is magic to non-scientists. The electric light is magic if you don't know how it functions. And so, I suppose I was a magic man. But I've had lots of nicknames over the years, some of them not repeatable, some of them probably not to my face. Oh, Indiana Bones. Yeah, that was a journalist. Yeah, Indiana Bones. Yeah. Well, I'm not built heavy. I'm really light, which I find really handy for climbing trees. There aren't many people of my age who can get to the top of a tree. Most can't even get off the ground. So being light is quite useful. But yeah, one newspaper chose to call me Indiana Bones because you can see my ribs. Yeah. Okay. What else? There was one of the directors in the early days of Big Adventure, before it got called O'Shea's Big Adventure, which wasn't my choice of title. One of the directors was saying we should call it Crocodile Dudley, and I said, I'm not from Dudley, I'm from Wolverhampton, we don't talk like that. Oh dear. So, I didn't, thankfully. Yes. Nicknames. Catweasel, of course, yes. That's another one. Catweasel. What was it? That was the Independent. I made a film about the brown tree snake or brown cat snake on Guam, where it's caused an ecological disaster. Eating all the flightless birds and biting children and causing power outs because there's nothing like a snake for connecting to distant electrical points. And so the Independent had taken to calling me Catweasel. And the TV listing said, Catweasel seeks similar. It's like a lonely heart. But that was a strange Catweasel. I don't take any of these as insults. There was one newspaper wrote, and I think the journalist was trying to insult me. Didn't work. Something like, let me think now. With his straggly beard and shorts, Mark O'Shea looks like something the British Army have left behind in Burma. He's been living on stewed snake ever since, and it's left him suspicious and irascible. Right on. That's me. I thought it was funny. So somebody really put some thought into insulting me. Because I actually liked it. I don't mind being left behind by the British Army in Burma. That's not an insult at all. Why snakes? As one journalist once said to me, yes, well, that's all very well, Mark, but, why snakes? You've seen one, you've seen them all. Which is clearly the statement of somebody who's never seen one. Anyone who's had any time around snakes will very quickly realise that they are an extremely diverse and fascinating group of animals. Whether you love them or hate them, that doesn't remove the fact that they are an extremely diverse and fascinating group of animals. But why snakes was in my case? Well, I think I was interested in snakes initially because no one else liked them. You know, I was a bit of a rebel, I suppose. I was young and I liked animals that other people were frightened of. I hadn't met a snake at that point, but I got very interested in snakes. And we're talking now when I'm less than 10 years old. And we were on holiday in Ireland. We used to take, my parents were teachers, and with my brother we used to go and take caravanning holidays. We used to tour all over Ireland and stay in remote locations, and beautiful, because we're obviously Irish stock originally. And we went to Dublin Zoo, Phoenix Park, and this would be about 1964, 1965, and as we approached the reptile house, which was always a magnet for me, somebody was coming out and they said, if you ask the keeper, he'll take out a snake for you. And we went in, my mum asked the keeper, and he took out a boa constrictor and passed it to me to hold. And this boa constrictor seemed to be twice as long as I was tall. It wasn't, but I was quite short then. And I was just completely smitten with it. I don't remember much for the rest of the day, really, after that. You can't cap that. And held the boa constrictor for a while. And it was put away, and that was sort of signed and sealed, you know. And when there's actually a picture of me at the zoo, and my brother's tucking into an ice cream, I'm not. I've no interest in such childish things as ice creams. I've moved on, I'm fascinated by snakes. And I'm an anti-foodie. If I could be like a reptile and eat once a month or once every few months, that'd be fine. I resent the time taken up eating, cooking, washing up. And I said to Ainsley Harriott when I did Chris Packham and I did Ready Steady Cook, celebrity Ready Steady Cook, and I said to Ainsley, you know, I don't believe in anything that takes longer to prepare than it does to consume. And Ainsley went, poof. I don't think he's used that one. But anyway, back in England, I wanted a snake, and I wanted to learn more about snakes. And then we were out on a local beauty spot. I'd been off school sick, and my aunt took me for a walk on one of my favourite places, a place called Kinveredge. And there were reputedly adders on Kinveredge, and I'd never seen a wild snake. And whenever we took walks over there with the family dog, I'd hoped and hoped against hope to see a wild snake. And then my aunt's taken me for a walk. Where do you want to go for your last day before you go back to school? Kinveredge. So we went to Kinveredge. We're walking along. This is again still in the 60s. And she said to me, there aren't any snakes here, are there? And I said, no, well, there are, but we've never seen one. And at that moment, I heard the rustling, the unmistakable rustling of a snake coming through the dead bracken. And we stopped and I watched. And out before me came a male adder. An adult male adder, a real live adder. And boa constrictor at the zoo belonged to the zoo. But this was a wild snake. For me, then, not understanding about conservation and things like that, this was fair game. And I got down on my hands and knees trying to catch it. We were both trying to corral this adder to catch it. Well, fortunately, our snake catching skills were not up to those of my later years, and that snake very fortunately gave us the slip, which is just as well because adder bites are not fun. I was bitten twice in the 70s, and it does ruin your weekend, and it ruins the weekend of all your nearest and dearest a hell of a lot more. A bite at the tender age of 7 or 8 wouldn't have been a good idea. Snake got away. But when I got back, that was it. I now wanted a snake. And set about trying to find out how to get a snake. And I wrote a letter to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi of India. And the letter said something to the effect of, Dear Prime Minister, you have lots of pythons in India. Can I have one, please? And sadly I never posted it. It would be a nice anecdote if I had posted it, but I never posted it. But I did end up with a pet snake within, probably within 6 months of that adder. Pet shop was bringing in Italian grass snakes, which are the same subspecies we've got here in Britain, Natrix helvetica. And I had this pet grass snake, which was the most beautiful grass snake in the entire world. And I called her Escapist. I feel animals have to earn names. You don't just go, we call it Fred. I think animals have to earn names. And Escapist certainly did that, as you can tell. Everywhere in the house. Under the boiler, on the first floor. Under the floorboards in the bathroom, behind the boiler in the kitchen, everywhere, but always got her back. I'd sit up all night once, waiting for her to come out of one hidey hole. You know, those cages weren't exactly escape-proof. But, yeah, that was Escapist, and that was basically the start of me keeping snakes. I first appeared on camera, in the tropics, catching reptiles in the 1980s, when I was working for the Royal Geographical Society in Brazil. On the Maracay Rainforest project, I was doing the reptile part of the survey. And whenever we had visitors, we've got big lagoons there, and whenever we got visitors, it was sort of a good idea if I took them out caiman catching South American alligators. Now, caiman catching involved them standing on the bank, red lighting for caiman, and me swimming around in the lagoon in the darkness with a head torch on, being guided by them, catching the caiman, bringing it back to the bank, and identifying what species it was. But anyway, there was a guy who came out and made a short film about that, and it was eventually shown on Channel 4 in a series called Odyssey. So, that had me catching caiman and catching a boa constrictor and lots of other stuff. None of it staged, all as it happened, which is the way I worked. And then you'll know I've been based at West Midlands Safari Park for almost 30 years. And I used to do quite a lot at the safari park. You know, film crews would come up and do things with me. There was usually something going on. And I had a number of people drop by, and they'd say, you catch snakes in the field, don't you, Mark? I said, yes, I do that. Oh, that'd be really interesting. I have a film crew following you around and filming what you catch. I said, yeah, would you? All right, I'll go away and write a treatment up and we'll see if... Well, you never heard anything of any of these because they obviously, they wrote it up and it didn't get accepted. And then I had a producer phone me up, and they were doing a series. It went under several names. Into the Unknown, Supernatural. It was about giant animals. And most of the animals they were dealing with were extinct. Like Megalania, the giant monitor lizard from Australia. The giant Brazilian sloth. Kamchatka god bear. Things like this. But they also wanted to do giant snakes. And of course, giant snakes aren't extinct. Okay, Titanoboa is. But at this point in the 90s, Titanoboa hadn't been discovered, I don't think. And the producer phoned me up and she said, we want to film giant snakes. I'd like to come talk to you about it. So she came up and we had a coffee and at the safari park. And she said, what do you think the biggest snake is? I said, well, the longest snake in the world is the reticulated python, but the heaviest snake is the green anaconda. She said, well, do you know where we can catch them? Guaranteed on camera. I said, well, yes. Because I've got a friend who's got a ranch in Venezuela. And it's full to the gunnels with anacondas. Because only a month earlier, he'd written to me. And he said, Mark, you really should come over and spend some time with me. We can go out and catch anacondas, they're everywhere. And I'd written back and said I'd love to, but I just can't afford the airfare to Venezuela. Anyway, I told the producer and she said, well, if we went to Venezuela. Could you guarantee to catch anacondas, big anacondas, on camera? I said, yeah. She said, right, okay. And within weeks it was put together, and I contacted my friend and said, change my mind, we're coming. And I arrived, they arrived, and I caught 32 anacondas, up to 18 feet long and 11.5 stone, which impressed them. And off the strength of that, they wanted to do another film with me. So we made the film Black Mamba, and we caught 3 black mambas. And we were catching them and milking them and stuff like that. And that was a really fun film. And they came back to me again, and they said, look, we'd like to make a half series with you. 6 half-hour films. And it'd be for Discovery Channel's new Animal Planet station and Channel 4. And that was the first series of O'Shea's Big Adventure, which was their choice. You see, Channel 4 would not use the same name as Animal Planet. So they called it Dangerous Reptiles. I didn't want to make out they were all dangerous. I made films about things. I always said a species doesn't have to be big or dangerous to qualify as an O'Shea target species. It just has to have an interesting story. And I made a film about a 3-inch lizard that glowed in the dark, and I made another film about a 3-inch lizard that had green blood. So I don't want to go and just wave this. It's got to be big and dangerous to be film worthy. That's utter nonsense. I caught a species of python on camera in Western Province, Papua New Guinea. It was on an old airstrip. It hadn't been open for 10 years, and they'd opened it up for us to use. And I'm on this airstrip, and I'm looking behind this tin sheeting, and I found this shed skin. It looks like a python skin. Then I found the python. And I'm going, it's a water python. But it can't be. It should be, because they're here. But it isn't. And then I'm going, is it a baby amethystine python? No, it's not. And I'm on camera. And I'm thinking aloud. My head's going, I don't know what this is. I wrote the book on the snakes of Papua New Guinea. There are 8 python species in it, and this is not one of them. This is something else. It's a python. So I then worked it out after we'd finished filming for that day. I sat down and I thought, right, back to first principles. It is a python. Take it from there. And it came out as a spotted python, which are endemic to Australia. They're not found in New Guinea. They weren't found in New Guinea. First record. And the sad thing about that is because I published it in a journal, as you would, they've now got poachers collecting them for the pet trade. Oh dear. Because you almost feel like you want to publish your data, but you only want it to be selectively read. Because there are always people who will use data for nefarious purposes. Money lovers. Because they will, for the rarity of a species, they will see that species go extinct so long as they can make a bob or two out of it. And it's the same concept with rhino horns, you see. I've got to feed my family, I've got to make some money, I'll shoot that rhino. I can sell the horn, I'll be able to buy a house, and I'll be able to buy a car as well. Yeah, and you'll wipe the species out for short-term gain. And, it just saddens me. The wild trade. They estimate, the IUCN estimated that 750,000 reticulated pythons and 500,000 short-tailed pythons went through specialised reptile charnel houses, slaughterhouses in Borneo and Sumatra alone every year. Beggars belief. It's not a case of whether you like snakes or not. You just got to see something like that and think, but why? How can a wild population sustain that sort of just gross overkill? 750,000 pythons of one species, 500,000 of another, every year. One of the saddest things was when we did a raid on an illegal reptile skin and meat and gallbladder factory outside Bangkok. And they'd been tipped off, they'd thrown everything over the fence, but we found it. And there were 2 dead king cobras in one bag. I opened a door, and it was a toilet. And there were lots of these blue plastic mesh bags that divers use. And they were all hissing very loudly. There's maybe 10 bags, and they were all full of huge, great Russell's vipers. Man, that's a toilet full of dangerous snakes. They were destined for the skin trade. We rescued all of those. I don't know what the authorities did with them, because that's a dangerous snake. That's the one that makes your gonads shrink and all your hair drop out. It's nasty venom. But just one raid on one illegal reptile factory on one day. I mean, it's the 21st century. We should have a totally different appreciation of wildlife. They started rattlesnake roundups to protect stock, cattle, against rattlesnakes that were biting them. And you can sort of understand that. But it's grown into a tourist thing, where they do things like, how long can you stay in a sleeping bag with 20 rattlesnakes? How many rattlesnakes can you stuff in a sack in 30 seconds? How much rattlesnake meat can you eat? And they chop the heads off the rattlesnakes, and they throw the heads into vats of water, and the eyes follow people, because the head doesn't die immediately. Just utter barbarism. And I've spoken out against it a number of times. It's come up a couple of times in filming. And I just said, no, I cannot go there. Because if I go there, I will be angry, and I will say something. And probably I'll either have to be escorted out by armed sheriffs, or I'll be going out in an ambulance, because I will say something to the wrong person. Because I just do not see the need. I mean, they now bring rattlesnakes in from out of state because they can't find enough. Just collecting the rattlesnakes. They go out collecting the rattlesnakes, and they jimmy open places for snakes to live in, and they pump gasoline in to smoke them out. What about all the other animals that live in there as well, let alone the snakes? They just stood on the habitat, they're killing lots of things, and then they kill all these rattlesnakes. And anyway, when we were filming a programme about timber rattlesnakes, the director wanted me to go to a roundup, and I said, I'm sorry, I just can't, because it'd really upset me, and I'll end up, I will speak my mind. And I got into a bad bar fight in 1980 in Florida, because I called someone a low-down Yankee thief, and he objected to being called a Yankee because he was a Southerner. And I was having a fight, which I only just got out of. Me against the entire bar. It's not the best odds. A good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, said, Mark, if you were a cat, you'd be dead by now, because he's calculated I've had 9 lives already. And he's probably not far wrong, because I've had a number of serious snake bites. At least one of my rattlesnake bites was very nearly fatal, a canebrake rattlesnake in '93. When you have a serious snake bite, you have to, it's easy to say, of course, it's harder to enact it, of course, but you have to basically, a serious snake bite, you have to deal with it like, my best friend has been bitten. And unless I keep my head, they're going to die. You have to slightly divorce yourself from the fact that it's you. And in the case of that bite, I was bitten in the wrist by a big rattlesnake while I was feeding it. Prey-taking bite, it was going to be a lot of venom. And I locked the snakes up. Bank holiday Saturday it was. Locked the snakes up. Went to the fridge, got the right antivenoms out, put that in my pocket. And then I drove to the front office, because we didn't have a phone in the reptile house back then. Against traffic, got to the front office, went in, asked them to call an ambulance, and then made a couple of phone calls myself. One to my mother, to tell her I'd been bitten. The next thing I knew, paramedics were working on me on the floor. I'd obviously gone down. And they got the antivenom over to them. I was taken off to hospital. I was taken to the local hospital first, and I was taken in my uniform that said Westminster Safari Park Reptiles, and I couldn't see by now. I was blind. And I heard the nurse say, "Doctor, we have a snake bite." And an Indian doctor, he said, "A snake bite?" He said, "It'll be an adder." And she said, "No, it's not an adder, it's a rattlesnake." And he said, "Rattlesnake? How'd somebody get bitten by a rattlesnake?" And she said, "He's from the safari park up the road. Haven't you been there?" And he said, "No, but I guess we'll be getting tickets now, eh?" Well, what if you don't really say me, won't? Anyway, he got my antivenom, and the antivenom has instructions in English and Spanish. And he pulled, I had him pull out the instructions out, and he must have dropped the English ones on the floor. I couldn't see, I'm visualising all this because I can't see. And he's got the Spanish instructions. There's an English there, but he's got the Spanish ones. And he's walking around and he's going, and he's saying, "Does anyone speak Spanish? Anyone been to Spain on their holiday?" ordering a meal with the housewright is slightly different to reading the Spanish instructions on the correct dosage of a potentially lethal drug. So I'm a bit concerned about that. And he's walking around and I'm thinking, this isn't good. This isn't good. I'm more concerned about what they were going to do, because I'm hypersensitized to antivenom. That's why I was concerned, because you just give me the antivenom, I can go into anaphylaxis. I need adrenaline first. And I could hear one of my colleagues was there. I was good to hear his voice, and he was saying, "You've got to call Professor Worrell. He's got a history of snake bites. You must administer." But he's been brushed aside by this doctor. And I reached around and I felt a nurse's sleeve, and I pulled it, and she came down, and I said, and I could hardly talk. I said, "I'm hypersensitive to antivenom." And she said, "Oh, don't worry, dear. Lots of people are." I thought, really? How do you know that? Have you ever met anyone who's had a snake bite before? I think not. This is ridiculous. So I'm thinking, this isn't good. This isn't good. But then somebody had contacted Professor Worrell, and they were going to move me to the poisons unit, which is in Birmingham, and put me in an ambulance. You know, blue lights, blues and twos all the way. And we're going along, and at this point, it's very strange. I couldn't see, but one half of my body was tingling, electrified, literally. One half. I think it was the right side. And the other side was normal. And then we're going along in the ambulance, high speed, and all I could see were blue every so often. We've got 6 or 8 police motorcycle outriders, and they were relaying. They were closing off. This is a bank holiday. Saturday. You know, busy weekend. They're closing off every single road junction, every single traffic lights, everything, all the way. So we flew there in about 20 minutes, probably less. It was just amazing, just the precision of how they got this worked out. And I suddenly felt like I'd been punched in the small of the back, or kicked or something, because it was like a just. Have you ever had an electric shock? Well, I have. I've had several. Right. But I felt like it was like a massive jolt of electricity, and I must have jumped. And she said, the nurse, she said, "Are you all right? You're right." I said, "The venom's going global." I felt it, and with that, it broke through the barrier, and my whole body. You know when you see a cartoon of Tom and Jerry, and Tom gets electrocuted. It's just like that. All his hair stands on end, and he's just jumping around. That's me. That's exactly how I felt. I felt like I'd been plugged into the mains and it had been turned right up full. And I was just... The venom had just... It was my whole body. And I knew this was serious. I thought, I've had rattlesnake bites in the past, but none like this. And I thought, oh dear. If I lose consciousness now, if I allow myself to go to sleep, I'm pretty sure I won't wake up again. So I have to stay conscious. And I have to find some way of staying conscious, to know I'm staying conscious. And so what I did was little memory tests that I do, you know. Do you know all the United States? Can you recite them? I can. Brazil, States of Brazil, province of New Guinea, departments for Honduras. I can do all those. But here's a good one. At that time, there were 32 species of rattlesnakes. I know them in Latin. So, 32 species. I know I can get to 29 quickly, and then I'll have to think. So, I thought, right, 32 species of rattlesnakes, okay. Crotalus atrox, Crotalus molossus, Crotalus adamantius, Crotalus basiliscus, Crotalus lanami, Crotalus trisediatus, Cisturus catenatus, Cisturus familiaris, etc., 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 etc. I get to 29 and I think, I'm sure there's another one begins with T. Oh yes, Tortuguensis. You know, now, this got me onto the onto the car park of the poisons unit, where they were waiting for me. And as it happens, my parents were there. The police outriders were stood in a line. There's the ambulance dropped me off. Police outriders were stood there, and my parents were stood over there. I couldn't see any of them. I watched it all. I had an out-of-body experience. I was above the ambulance, and I watched them take me off the ambulance, and I watched them wheel me past the police outriders who were stood there, and I watched them take me to my parents. As we were going in, my mother touched my face. And then I'm in down the corridor with the poisons unit. And they took me onto the ward. And I heard Dr. Robin Ferner, who dealt with the previous bite of mine, and I heard his voice. And I thought, I've done my fight, it's over to you now. I'm in your hands, because I'm exhausted. Now, those sort of experiences, when you have near-lethal experiences, I've had a few near-lethal experiences, you do think about, you know, you value life. My mother was, she had cancer, and I'm obviously away filming around the world, which is an uncomfortable situation to be in when somebody close to you is so ill. But she seemed to be beating it, and she was much improved. And when the driver arrived to pick me up, to take me to the airport for that shoot in 2000, my mother was out brushing the dry leaves off the drive. And I said to the driver, I don't know why I said it to the driver, I said, I do hope that's not the last time I see my mum. I don't know what possessed me to say that, but anyway. Went to the airport and we flew first to New Caledonia. We made a film about giant geckos. And when we were finished filming that, and we were back at the hotel, I phoned home to see how my mother was. And I couldn't get her. There was no answer. So I phoned her sister. And I think my mother was there and she'd had a bit of a relapse. So I spoke to her and I said, look, I'll come home. She said, no, you've got a job to do, you stay. You've got a job to do. And the film crew, the production company were ready to fly me home at a drop of a hat. No, you stay out there. So we carried on filming, and the next film was on Guam, and Saipan, and that was the brown tree snake. And when it finished, that film, I was back in the hotel. I phoned home. Well, I phoned my aunt. My mother wasn't there. She was in hospital. She was worse. And so I phoned the hospital, and they put her on, and no, you shouldn't call. You should stay out there. And I said, well, I'll come home. She said, no, stay. You've got to stay out and do your job. So I carried on filming, and she wouldn't hear of me coming back. And anyway, the next film after that was the one on sea snakes. And we're up in Queensland, and we're catching lots of sea snakes, and we're out to Western Australia, out to Ashmore Reef, on a dive boat. It's 30 hours by boat. And we're coming back in towards Broome on the boat, and it's night, I'm asleep. And I got a call to come up onto the bridge. And my brother was on the phone. How did he know? I don't know how he knew to contact me on the Kimberley Quest, but he said, look, you better come home. I don't think she's going to be here when you get here. I said, well, I am coming home. I'm coming back now because we're on our way into Broome and I'll be flying home soon. So it was quite I should have been looking forward to going home because I was flying home a day ahead of the crew anyway, because I was actually due to go to a black tie dinner in London and receive the Millennium Award for services to exploration in zoology from the Explorers Club of New York, British chapter, this big event in a big hotel in London. A hell of an event. There were 7 or 8 recipients: Ranulph Fiennes, Chris Bonington, Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut, Michael Wood, the historian, and me. And I should have been looking forward to that, but my mind now, it's all set up. There's going to be a driver there to pick me up and drive me to the hotel. So, I'm flying back from Broome, checked in, flew from Broome to Bali, Bali to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to London. It's a long way, and you don't know what you're going to find at the other end. And I've been told my mum's not going to be alive if I don't hurry back. And the driver met me, and he says, we'll go to the hotel. I said, no, we'll go back to Shropshire. And I had him drive me up. I went straight to my brother's house, and I said, what's the news? And he said, she's still there, she's still with us. And went to the hospice. She was in a hospice now. Went to see her, and she'd lost a lot of weight. She was not the person I'd seen brushing the drive, which was 6 weeks. I can't remember the exact time. 3 films ago, not more than 6 weeks. wasn't 6 weeks, but whatever, when I left. And she was both pleased to see me, but also, I'm told, she wanted to go before I arrived because she didn't want me to see her like that. And I was glad she was still with us. And she said, "You're supposed to be at your award ceremony. You're not supposed to be here." I said, "Yeah, I know, but this is more important." She said, "No, you must go to your award ceremony." So, having seen her, we phoned the driver, who was still hanging around, and drove us down to the award ceremony. And I went to the award ceremony. In this hotel, big black tie dinner. There were a lot of important people there. There was people from the European royal families and things like that. And lots of explorers and top names, Ranulph Fiennes. And I went on stage to accept my medal, which I'd got upstairs. I went to accept my medal. And, originally I'd written an acceptance speech because I was going to accept it. Tear that up. And I said, I just ad-libbed it. I said, every expedition has its support team. And my support team has always been my mother. And she's dealt with all my correspondence and any issues I need dealing with. She's sorted lots of things out for me while I've been overseas over decades. She's been there. She's been my rock. And now she's lying in a hospice. She's lying in a hospice in the Midlands. And she's dying of cancer. And so I'm accepting this medal as much for her as I am for me. Because an expedition without its support team is no expedition. Or words to that effect. And I accept the medal, and I had to come off the stage, because it was having an effect, obviously. And I got a standing ovation. And people were just coming up to me for the rest of the evening saying, "Marvellous, tremendous," and how right, and all of that. And the next day, because I was at the hotel overnight, the next day, came back up to the Midlands, went straight round to the hospice, and gave my mother the medal. She said, "You shouldn't have brought that here, it'll get stolen." "No, you shouldn't have brought it." I said, "No, you have it today, you can have it today." But I had to take it away before she went to sleep because she was so worried about it. And she did, she got the medal. And she lived 2 weeks. And my brother's gone from cancer now. The ironic thing is, I pushed the envelope so many times. Snake bites and things like that. And quite frankly, they're all preferable to cancer. My brother was really fit, played football, great, very, very good footballer. Strong as an ox, worked on cars, built his own house, Didn't do any of the dangerous, he drove fast cars and motorbikes. He didn't do any some of the stuff that I do that would be construed as dangerous. When he was ill, he said to me, "I thought this would be me seeing you off." I said, "Same here." It's fact. When my mother funeral, all her skiing friends were there, all her hiking friends were there, rambling friends were there, because she'd been all over Europe. She knew more of Europe than I did. And I've spoken at my father's, my mother's and my brother's funerals. But at my mother's, I told her friends a story they didn't know. And it was about when she went to Romania. And she had some Romanian teacher friends, a man and a woman. And they were out walking in the snow, in the woods. And whenever my mother went away on holiday, she took a luxury, which was a family-sized bar of Cadbury's Dairy Milk chocolate. And she would allow herself a piece every so often. That was her luxury. And they're walking along. And out of the woods came a bear. And this bear's looping towards her. And I mean, it's a European brown bear, they're dangerous. And the Romanian man said, stand still. So they all stood still. And the bear continued to come. And he said, have you got anything you can throw at it can eat? And my mother said, only my chocolate bar. He says, quick, throw it. So she got a pack off, she took out a big prize Terry milk choc, and she threw it, and it landed in front of the bear, who stopped, snuffled down, and picked it up in his mouth, seemed preoccupied with it, and the Romanian man said, run! And him and the woman ran to the tree line. And when he turned around, my mum was still stood there watching the bear. And he says, run, Barbara, run! So she's out of the watching the bear and ran. He says, why didn't you run? She said, didn't take the wrapper off, just take the water. Silver paper on your teeth, you know what that feels like, don't you? She couldn't understand how the bear could eat an entire bar of chocolate with the silver wrapper still on. That was really, hurt your teeth. She was just completely amazed by that. To think that we know everything about would be untrue. To think we know all the species, of course, would be untrue. And amongst reptiles, there's new species being discovered all the time. I believe that anybody who takes any sort of an exotic holiday sees new species. Spiders, moths, maybe lizards, maybe frogs. It's the ability to recognise them as new species. That's the crux of the matter. Which means you have to have a knowledge of the species that already exist, which means you have to be a bit of a specialist in that group. So I'm sure I've seen new species of spiders in the jungle. But because I don't specialise in spiders, I don't know which ones are the described species and why that one is different. Whereas if I see a snake, I know immediately. That's not a described species. This is new. So it's the ability to recognise it as a new species. That's the important thing. And so there's plenty still out there to be done, described, learned, and there's plenty of room for everybody to specialise and to get involved. Long may that be the case. The other thing is that if people have got a dream about what they want to do, just don't lose sight of the dream, and you should be able to achieve it. I went back into education, having worked in the NHS as a mature student, and I'm just amazed at where that decision took me in life. Take chances, take opportunities, because you'll always ask yourself, what if I'd done that? So it's always worth doing that. It's never too late to go back into education. It's not necessary to always have a first. You can still make a life with a second. Mm-hmm. And just don't lose sight of your dreams, of what you want to achieve. There'll be need in herpetologists in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. People there are babes being born today who are going to be famous and respected in their fields. They don't know it yet. And those that decide, I want to become an herpetologist, I'm going to study as hard as I can, not because the teachers want me to, not because my parents want me to, but because I want to achieve this. I want to be a reptile expert. Some of the kids I've had as work experience have gone on and got PhDs now. It's nice. It's great. When there was an Asian family come up to me a weekend ago at the safari park, and they'd been to see me a year or so ago, and the little lad was fascinated by snakes. And he said, the father said, you should be really proud of him, because having met you, he went away and he wrote a book at school. Outcatching Ophiophagus Hannah, King Cobra. And he won the headmaster's prize. you see, that will inspire him. And I'm sure that if he decides he still wants to be a biologist, he'll be a very successful one. My name is Mark O'Shea. I'm an herpetologist, that's a zoologist who specialises in both reptiles and amphibians, although my primary area is I study snakes, and I have a particular interest in venomous snakes. I know snakebite from both sides of the fence, both as the researcher and also as the victim. I've been around reptiles since my formative years, very, very young. And I've now managed to fill 5 decades with my interest in reptiles. I've written 5 or 6 books. I've presented around 40 natural history, adventure style television documentaries. I'm consultant curator of reptiles at West Midlands Safari Park and have been based there for nearly 30 years. And I've been travelling overseas for a very long time, indulging in my passion for the kind of animals that most people have nightmares about.